World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history. More than 70 million people perished, nations were torn apart, and the map of the world was forever changed. But to truly understand why it happened, we must go back to the years before the first shot was ever fired. It begins with the aftermath of World War I, when the guns fell silent in 1918. 4 years of brutal stalemate had left Europe exhausted and disillusioned. At least that was how many wanted to see it. And there was no one more eager than the United States. No longer willing to sit idle in the conflict, President Woodrow Wilson proclaimed American victory in the war. Wilson's idealism was evident in his call for peace without victory. For once, America wanted no part of occupation or punishing the vanquished. The U.S. president wanted to shape the post-war order. His vision was outlined in his famous 14-point speech, which called for an end to secret treaties, free trade, and open diplomacy. But Wilsonian idealism was soon swept aside by hard-nosed diplomacy. The victors gathered in Paris to draft the peace treaty, and these were not men interested in making the world safe for democracy. British Prime Minister David Lloyd George wanted harsh reparations from Germany to cover the cost of the war. French leader Georges Clemenceau, who would turn out to be a shrewd judge of character, demanded that the Germans withdraw their troops from Belgium and restore Belgium's sovereignty. The Germans, of course, refused. With that, the French premier threw them out of the peace talks. There was no point negotiating with a bunch of ex-cons, he said. So the terms of the Treaty of Versailles were dictated rather than discussed. Article 231 of the Treaty of Versailles is infamous because it forces Germany to accept full responsibility for causing all the damage. That may sound fair, but it wasn't. It was loaded language. It placed Germany in the dock as an accused war criminal. Of course, France, Britain, Italy, and the rest of the victorious Allies were let off scot-free. How much would this humiliation matter? We'll get to that shortly. But for now, let's finish our tour of the peace accords. Germany lost about 13% of its territory, including overseas colonies. Its military was limited to 100,000 men and no air force or navy at all. The German people were ordered to pay around 1.32 billion gold marks, or the equivalent of around $41 billion in reparations. In addition to demilitarizing Germany, the Allies wanted to break it economically. The Ruhr, the industrial heartland of Germany, was occupied by Belgian and French troops. All the while, the German economy was collapsing under the weight of reparations payments. Add to this social unrest and political upheaval, and you have the perfect conditions for extremists to exploit. Let's talk about that now. The First World War was a bloodbath. It is estimated that somewhere between 15 and 21 million people died, not to mention countless wounded. The toll on individuals was immense. Men came back from the front lines, physically and psychologically scarred. Soldiers haunted by trench fever and the constant dread of death became a common sight. But the effects of the war went well beyond those who served. The Great War killed millions of civilians. Their deaths resulted from combat and terror bombing, but mostly from the breakdown of supply chains and shortages of food and medical care. In fact, the war triggered the worst flu pandemic in history. Infected soldiers spread the disease worldwide, killing an estimated 50 million people. By comparison, the Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the 14th century, killed an estimated 25 million people. The First World War also sparked revolutions that swept across Europe. Austria-Hungary broke apart, and so did the Ottoman Empire. Russia became a communist state under Vladimir Lenin. Germany went from monarchy to republic, while Italy, France, and Britain emerged stronger than ever. But the post-war era was not without its problems. The war had taken such a heavy toll that the entire continent needed time to heal. Germany was in financial crisis, shell-shocked by the devastation. The other European countries were struggling to keep afloat. They imposed strict sanctions on trade with Germany and demanded reparations. By 1923, Germany's currency was practically worthless. 1,000,000 marks could barely buy a loaf of bread. Inflation was out of control. Hyperinflation meant that wages, savings, investments, and pensions were wiped out almost overnight. Unemployment was rampant, and the middle class was devastated. By late 1923, only 19% of Germany's pre-war industrial capacity remained. Remember, this is in a country with a tradition of innovation. German engineering was world-renowned. What happened? Amidst the wreckage, there were glimmers of hope. In 1924, the Americans provided a loan to stabilize the German currency. By 1929, production had risen to 80% of its pre-war level. But the recovery proved fragile. When the stock market crashed and the Great Depression swept across the world, it hit Germany particularly hard. Economic stagnation led to social unrest. People took to the streets in protest. Strikes and riots broke out across the country. It was a climate ripe for exploitation by extremist parties. Enter Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Born in Austria in 1889, Hitler moved to Munich in 1913. Soon after, he joined the German army, where he served on the front lines during the First World War. After Germany's defeat, Hitler returned home and joined the struggling German Workers' Party, which later became known as the Nazi Party. Hitler's speeches were fiery and full of rage against the Jews, whom he blamed for Germany's woes. He denounced the Treaty of Versailles and demanded that Germany reclaim its lost territories. His words resonated with a population that was angry and disillusioned. Hitler promised revenge and restoration, Anschluss or union with Austria, and a German-led crusade against communism, which he called Bolshevism. He claimed to have the support of veterans and nationalists, as well as intellectuals and academics. But most important of all, he attracted the interest of big business. Well-to-do German industrialists realized they could benefit from the return of aggressive nationalism and economic protectionism. The Nazis were able to raise funds and build up a paramilitary force. It was called the Sturmabteilung, or SA for short. The Sturmabteilung were the shock troops of the Nazi movement, carrying out violent attacks on the Nazis' behalf. As the Nazi membership grew, so did its violence. The Sturmabteilung clashed with the police, communists, and anyone else who opposed them. But their attacks were often ill-disciplined and poorly planned. Hitler's solution was to create a special unit to protect Nazi meetings and carry out assassinations. It was called the SS, or Schutzstaffel, and it was headed by Heinrich Himmler, who would become one of the chief architects of the Holocaust. After several failed attempts on Hitler's life, the Nazi leader was forced to go into hiding. On June 1932, he was nearly assassinated by a communist. Then in November 1932, a member of a small far-right paramilitary group tried to kill him with a bomb. Both attempts failed. But on February 1933, it was a member of a far-right nationalist group who seriously injured Hitler. The assassination attempt galvanized the German people. They rallied around their Führer, the injured leader. The more radical elements of the nationalists and conservatives alike began to see the value of joining the Nazi movement. Within weeks, Hitler was elected Chancellor of Germany. The Nazis won 288 out of 607 seats in the Reichstag, or parliament. And just like that, the extremists had come to power. Hitler set about consolidating his power base. The first step was to eliminate potential rivals. On February 1933, the Reichstag building caught fire. Rumors abounded that the blaze was set by communists aiming to pin the blame on the Nazis. Hitler declared a state of emergency, suspended civil liberties, and ended the meeting of the Reichstag. The opposition parties, particularly the communists, were targeted and banned. Then the Enabling Act was passed, which transferred all power to Hitler. From that day on, Germany was run by a one-party state. Anyone who opposed the Nazi regime was silenced, imprisoned, or murdered. Opposition newspapers were closed down, and alternative sources of information were tightly controlled. If you didn't support Hitler, you were considered an enemy of the state. Now that he was in power, Hitler got to work on undoing the Treaty of Versailles. In March 1935, the Nuremberg Laws were introduced, which stripped Jews of their citizenship. In March 1936, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland, which was supposed to be a demilitarized zone according to the Treaty of Versailles. In September 1938, Hitler annexed Austria in a move known as Anschluss. Finally, in September 1938, Hitler took control of the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia inhabited by many ethnic Germans. Each time, the rest of Europe hesitated to intervene. Why? Because they were tired of war. The policy of appeasement was born. Essentially, the idea was to give in to some of Hitler's demands in the hopes that it would satisfy him. And yet, despite all the appeasement, Hitler and his generals grew bolder. On August 1939, a shocking pact was signed. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union agreed not to attack each other. This secret agreement also divided Poland between them. Now Hitler could move without fear of Soviet resistance. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. The Second Great War of the 20th century had begun. So why did World War II start? It began with anger and humiliation from the last war, fueled by economic despair, driven by dictators with visions of conquest, and enabled by nations too weary to confront aggression early. The lessons of that failure echo even today, reminding us that unchecked ambition and silence in the face of injustice can unleash destruction on a global scale. Thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking content.